I found my daughter sitting on the curb outside a daycare center with 2 trash bags of clothes and my granddaughter asleep against her shoulder. I asked her why she wasn't at the clinic. She looked up at me, mascara running down her face, and said, "Dad, Marcus's father had me fired. He told the whole board I wasn't fit to carry the Whitfield name." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even change my expression. I just opened the truck door and said, "Get in." Carter Whitfield believed he had erased a nobody from his family tree that morning. He had no idea he had just picked a fight with the man who held the note on every property his family owned. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know down in the comments. Have you ever been written off by someone who thought their money made them better than you? Hit subscribe if you believe a man's worth isn't measured by his bank statement. My name is Otis Marable. I'm 68 years old, and I have spent 4 decades teaching this city that the quietest man in the room is usually the one holding all the cards. To the people of Charlotte, I'm an old man in coveralls who fixes furnaces for a living. They see the grease under my fingernails and assume I'm broke. They see my 20-year-old work van and assume I never made anything of myself. They see the small brick house I've lived in since 1987 and they pity me. I let them. I have let this entire city underestimate me for 40 years, and every single year, that mistake has made me richer. It was a Thursday morning, humid the way Charlotte gets in late spring, the air thick enough to chew. I was driving back from a service call on Trade Street, weaving through traffic in my van with Marable Heating and Air painted on the side, in letters that have faded to almost nothing. Nobody who sees that van knows that the company itself, the one that employs 40 technicians across 3 counties, is just the smallest branch of what I actually own. To my customers, I'm just Otis, the man who shows up on time and doesn't overcharge. That's exactly how I designed it. A man who looks like he has nothing is a man nobody bothers to watch closely. I saw them before they saw me. That's the kind of thing a father never forgets. The image burning itself behind your eyes before your brain even finishes understanding it. My daughter Renee was sitting on the curb in front of Little Sprouts Daycare, 2 black trash bags stuffed with clothes beside her, and in her lap, my granddaughter Zaria, 3 years old, asleep with her thumb in her mouth like she didn't have a single worry in the world. Renee is 30 years old. She's a pediatric nurse, sharp as anyone I've ever known. The kind of woman who can read a room before anyone in it has said a word. She married into the Whitfield family 4 years ago, Marcus Whitfield, whose father Carter built half the strip malls and office parks in Mecklenburg County. I told her, gently, the way you tell your grown child something they don't want to hear, that men like Carter Whitfield don't see people like us as family. They see us as decoration, until we're inconvenient, and then they see us as a stain to scrub out. But Renee loved Marcus. And love has a way of making even the smartest people deaf to the things everybody else can hear. I pulled the van to the curb. The engine rattled the way it always does, loud enough that a woman walking her dog across the street turned to stare. I didn't care. I got out and walked over, and Renee looked up at me with eyes that had clearly been crying for a while. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking, "I got fired this morning. From the clinic." Carter called the hospital board personally. He told them I was, and I'm quoting him, "Dad, not the kind of bloodline that belongs around children of our standing." I felt something cold settle into my chest, but my face didn't move. 40 years of practice will do that to a man. He said that in front of people? I asked. In front of 3 board members. And then he told Marcus that if Marcus didn't divorce me by the end of the month, he was cutting him out of the company entirely. No inheritance, no job, nothing. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Marcus is still inside arguing with him. He told me to wait out here, that he'd handle it. She let out a small, broken laugh. "I don't think he can handle it, Dad." I don't think anybody can handle Carter Whitfield. I crouched down so I was eye level with her, the way I used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "Renee, look at me. Get your bags. Get Zaria. You're coming home with me." "Dad, I don't want to be a burden. You are my daughter," I said, and something in my voice made her stop talking. And that man just told the world my grandbaby's blood isn't good enough. He doesn't know whose blood he's talking about. I stood up and picked up both trash bags like they weighed nothing. Get in the van. She didn't understand the weight behind those words. She thought I was just being a comforting father, the way fathers are supposed to be when their children are hurting. She had no idea that 30 minutes from where we stood, in a glass tower on South Tryon Street, there was a leasing agreement with Carter Whitfield's signature on it. An agreement that named his entire flagship office building as collateral against a loan he had taken out 6 years ago, a loan held through 4 layers of holding companies designed specifically so no one would ever trace it back to me, by a man named Otis Marable. We drove home mostly in silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty, just full of things too big to say out loud yet. Zarya slept the whole way, her small chest rising and falling, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just cracked in half that morning. When we pulled into my driveway, Renee looked at the house like she was seeing it for the first time in years. Small, modest, a porch that needed repainting, a house that told the world nothing about the man who lived in it. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, as we walked inside. "I should have listened to you about Marcus's family." "Don't apologize for loving somebody," I told her, setting the bags down by the guest room door. "Apologize when you let somebody convince you that you're not enough. That's the only sin in this house." I made up the bed while she got Zarya settled on the couch, and then I went into my study, closed the door, and made a phone call I had been waiting 6 years to make. The man on the other end of the line was named Felix Adeyemi, a quiet, sharp attorney out of Atlanta who had handled every piece of my real estate holdings since 1994, and had never once spoken my name to anyone who didn't already know it. "Felix," I said, "it's time to call the Whitfield note." There was a pause on the line. "Otis, are you sure? You said you wanted to wait until the lease renewal in the fall. Calling it now is going to hit him hard and fast." "There won't be any soft landing." "I don't want there to be a soft landing," I said. "He just put my granddaughter's name in his mouth, like it was garbage. Send the notice." For the first time since I'd known him, Felix laughed, low and quiet. "Understood. Give me 48 hours. That night, I sat at the kitchen table after Renee and Zarya had gone to sleep, and I thought about how this had all started. 40 years ago, I was a 28-year-old HVAC technician who had just lost his own father, a man who'd worked on the loading docks his whole life and left me $11,000, and a piece of advice I never forgot. "Otis, white folks in this city will let you fix their air conditioner, but they'll never let you sit at their table. So don't try to sit at their table. Buy the building, the table's in." I took that $11,000 and I bought a half-collapsed duplex nobody wanted in a neighborhood everybody said was finished. I fixed it myself, nights and weekends, while running my service calls during the day. I rented it out. I bought another one, and another. I never once changed how I dressed, how I drove, how I spoke to people. Silence is profitable. A man nobody suspects is a man nobody negotiates against. By the time Marcus Whitfield ever laid eyes on my daughter, I quietly controlled more commercial real estate in this city than the Whitfield family did. Every bit of it tucked behind shell companies, with names that meant nothing to anyone. Crescent Holdings, Brightline Partners, names as gray and forgettable as my old van. 2 days later, Marcus showed up at my door, looking like a man who hadn't slept. Renee let him in, and I watched my daughter's face soften the second she saw him, which told me everything about how much she still loved him, foolish as that love might have been the past few days. "Mr. Marable," Marcus said, standing in my living room like a boy called to the principal's office. "I know my father has hurt this family terribly, and I want you to know I'm trying to fix it. I told him this morning that if he doesn't reverse Renee's termination and apologize, I'm done. I'm walking away from Whitfield Properties entirely." I studied him for a long moment. "Sit down, son." He sat. Renee sat beside him, taking his hand. "Your father didn't just insult my daughter," I said. "He insulted a 3-year-old child who has done nothing in this world except learn how to say her own name. That's not a business decision he made. That's a cruelty he chose." I let that sit in the room for a second. "Now, you said you're walking away. Tell me, Marcus, what happens to Whitfield Properties if you do?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "My father runs everything through the flagship building downtown. If I leave, he loses the only person who actually understands the financial side of the company. He's been coasting on momentum for years. I do the real work. And if something happened to that building, I said carefully, if the company lost access to it, somehow what would that do to him? Marcus frowned, confused by the question. It would end the company. Everything runs out of that tower. Why are you asking me this? I didn't answer him directly. I just said, give it some time, son. Things have a way of working themselves out when people are honest about who they really are. Marcus left that evening still confused, but something had shifted in his face, like a man who suspected there was a current running beneath the water that he couldn't quite see. The next morning, Felix called. It's done, he said. Notice has been served. Whitfield Properties has 30 days to satisfy the loan in full, or the building reverts to the holding company. Carter Whitfield is, as we speak, sitting in his office screaming at 3 different attorneys, none of whom can figure out who Crescent Holdings actually is. I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt in years, not joy exactly, something steadier than that, justice settling into place like a key, finally turning in a lock that had been stuck for decades. Word moves fast in a city like Charlotte, especially among the kind of men who circle each other at country clubs and charity galas. Men who'd spent years assuming Carter Whitfield's empire was as solid as the granite in his lobby. Within a week, 2 of his biggest tenants had quietly begun negotiating their own leases elsewhere, spooked by rumors that the building's ownership was in turmoil. Carter, I later learned, spent those 30 days making increasingly desperate calls, trying to identify Crescent Holdings, offering bribes to clerks, hiring private investigators, none of it getting him anywhere near my name. He had built his entire identity on being a man who always knew who he was dealing with. For the first time in his life, he didn't. On day 28, Renee came to me with tears in her eyes again, but different tears this time. Dad, she said, Marcus told me his father is having some kind of breakdown. He hasn't left the office in 2 days. He keeps saying somebody's coming for him, and he doesn't know who. She paused. Dad, is this you? Is this what you've been doing? I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised to be strong and smart and kind, and I decided she deserved the truth. Sit down, baby. Let me tell you a story about your grandfather, and a piece of advice he gave me a long time ago. I told her everything. The duplex. The decades of buildings, bought quietly, under names that meant nothing. The fact that her father-in-law had unknowingly built his entire empire on land and capital that ultimately traced back to me. By the time I finished, Renee was staring at me like she'd never seen me before in her life. You let me think we were just comfortable, she whispered. Dad, we're not comfortable. We're careful, I said. There's a difference. Money makes noise, Renee. Noise makes you a target. I didn't build all this so I could show it off. I built it so that one day, if anybody ever tried to hurt this family, I'd have the power to make it right. On day 30, the loan came due, and Carter Whitfield could not satisfy it. The building, the crown jewel of Whitfield Properties, the address on every piece of his company's letterhead, reverted to Crescent Holdings, LLC. Within hours, Crescent Holdings attorneys Felix and his team issued formal notice that the Whitfield Properties lease was terminated effective immediately, and that all current employees of the building, including the company's own staff, would need to vacate or renegotiate terms with the new ownership. Carter Whitfield, the man who had built his identity on never needing to ask anyone for anything, was forced to request an emergency meeting with the principals of Crescent Holdings to beg for time. I walked into that meeting myself. I didn't send a representative. I wore the same flannel shirt I wear to service calls, the same boots with the worn-down heels, and I watched the color drain out of Carter Whitfield's face the moment Felix introduced me as the sole owner of Crescent Holdings. You, Carter said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're the HVAC man. You fixed my unit at the lake house 3 years ago. I did, I said, taking a seat across from him. Charged you a fair price too, if I remember right. He looked like a man trying to do arithmetic that refused to add up. This isn't possible. I'm Renee's father, I said. The bloodline you said wasn't worthy of your family name. Funny thing about bloodlines, Carter. Mine's been quietly holding the deed to your family's entire legacy for the better part of a decade. I let him sit with that. You didn't get out negotiated by a stranger. You got outnegotiated by a man you looked straight through every single day and never once thought to actually see. Carter Whitfield aged 10 years in that room. He begged, in the end, the same way every man like him begs, when the floor finally gives out beneath his feet, not with dignity, but with offers, numbers, promises he had no ability to keep. I let him talk for a long while before I gave him my answer. I'm not interested in destroying you, I said, and I meant it, because revenge was never actually the thing I wanted. I wanted my daughter's name spoken with respect, and a man on his knees doesn't give you that. Not really. Here are my terms. Marcus runs the company from here forward, not you. You retire, quietly, with enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever again think you can buy your way into deciding who's worthy of belonging to a family. And you will personally, publicly, apologize to my daughter and my granddaughter in front of that same hospital board you humiliated her in front of. Carter Whitfield did all three things. He had no choice left to refuse. 6 months later, I drove past that glass tower on South Tryon Street and saw a new sign in the lobby window, a community health initiative, fully funded, offering free pediatric care to families in Charlotte's underserved neighborhoods, named the Zaria Marable Whitfield Children's Clinic. Renee runs it now, alongside her old colleagues from the hospital, the same people who had been forced to fire her months earlier. Marcus runs Whitfield Properties with an entirely new philosophy, redirecting profits the company used to hoard into affordable housing developments across the same neighborhoods his father used to look down on. I stopped by Renee's house that evening, the modest brick rancher she and Marcus chose over the lake house Carter once offered them, because Renee said she wanted Zaria to grow up understanding what enough actually feels like. Zaria ran across the yard to meet me, no longer the frightened 3-year-old asleep on a curb, but a girl who laughed loud and fell down and got back up without a single tear, the way children do when they finally feel safe in the ground beneath them. I sat on the porch steps that evening, the same kind of small, unremarkable porch I've sat on my entire adult life, and I thought about how people in this city still look at me and see an old man in a faded work van. They still don't know. Most of them never will, because that was never the point. The point was never to be seen. The point was to make sure that when the people I love needed someone standing behind them with real power, that power would be there, quiet and certain as bedrock. A man's worth was never going to be decided by Carter Whitfield, or by anyone else who judges a family by what's printed on a business card. I spent 40 years building something invisible, because invisible things are harder to take from you. And in the end, the only inheritance that actually matters isn't a name on a building or a number in an account. It's whether the people who carry your blood know, in their bones, that they were always worth fighting for. That's the only bloodline I ever cared about proving, and nobody, not Carter Whitfield, not anybody, was ever going to convince me otherwise. Real strength is never needed to announce itself. It just shows up, quietly, exactly when the people you love need it most. Otis didn't build 40 years of wealth to prove anybody wrong. He built it so love would have something solid to stand on when the world tried to knock it down. That's the real inheritance worth leaving behind. Not what we own, but how steady we stay for the ones who carry our name. A small note for you. This story was imagined and written by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its heartfelt lesson stays with you a little longer.